Money. It's something we all use every day without really giving it much thought. And yet before the 10th century BCE, nobody had any. They traded using cowrie shells, a form of currency that may have been used as far back as 9000 BCE. These little beauties were lightweight, durable, and people trusted them. Basically the perfect currency. That is, until one enterprising merchant noticed that since people carried them around in sacks, it was easy to palm off some of the shells when trading for a hefty profit. Thus began humanity's checkered history of trying to stay ahead of its own cleverness. From then on, money has always been a cat-and-mouse game between those who want to fiddle the system and those who want to stop them. Bartering was the first way humans did business, exchanging goods and services directly for other goods and services. But soon merchants found it useful to have a middleman object that could be exchanged for anything. At first, this was cattle, a unit of currency because they were useful, valuable, and relatively difficult to replicate. The Latin word pecunia originally referred to cattle used for payment and evolved into our word for money today. But as civilizations advanced, more sophisticated currencies were required. In China, around 1000 BCE, they settled on the weight of bronze. Merchants would carry around chunks of metal and weigh them rather than counting out individual coins. It wasn't long before someone realized it was easier to make many small coins of uniform weight than to lug around big ingots of metal. By 600 BCE, Lydia, in modern Turkey, then known as Ionia, was producing stamped coins of known weight and purity, widely adopted throughout the region. Soon the Greeks had their silver siglos, the Romans their gold aureus, and so on. For centuries, these were the go-to mediums of exchange. But while they were reliable, they were heavy. Also, merchants did like paying soldiers to guard their coin-filled carts. And often the guards would run away with the money rather than dying protecting it. In 7th century China, paper money was first used as an IOU, a negotiable sum of money that represented a value but had no value in itself. This is much like a modern check. You write for a sum of money and give it to someone who then gives it to the bank. The bank pays the person the amount written and takes the check from the person who gave it to them. In this case, the person getting the paper money paid the equivalent in precious metals or other valuables. They would keep the precious metals and give the paper money to traders to make change with. Then they would return the paper money to the government office when they got back. This made trade easier, but the success of paper money depends on trust. If everyone trusts the issuer, then the IOU is as good as cash. Today, the idea of trust is at the heart of every financial decision. 2,000 years later, in Europe, paper money came about in a similar way, although Marco Polo brought back the idea from Asia after his travels in the 13th century. In Italy, the city-state of Genoa began issuing paper money in 1157, backed by gold held in trust by the state. After failing, reviving, and failing again, in 1274, Florence took over the franchise. They called it Florentine, Florin, which was subdivided into 20 soldi, which were subdivided into 12 denarii. Eventually, the Medici Bank issued the first banknotes, pieces of paper money that could be exchanged for a sum of money at the bank. Essentially, the world's first ATM card. But as time went on, not all banks honored all notes. Counterfeiting became rampant and eventually governments stepped in. In 1661, Sweden introduced the first government-backed banknotes. The Bank of England followed suit in 1694, and France in 1716. This was the start of central banking, the idea of a single entity that controlled the supply of money in the nation. Central banks are still the cornerstone of most major economies today, but even government money isn't foolproof. Between 1913 and 1917, Germany printed so much money to pay for World War I that they went from having a billion-dollar economy to a trillion-dollar economy. Since then, inflation has averaged 7% a year. Today, hyperinflation is a thing of the past, but that doesn't mean people have stopped fiddling the system. After the Second World War, governments began to regulate their currencies with digits. Dollars were backed by gold, but now it's just digits on a screen. The whole system relies on faith. We believe in the dollar because we believe in the United States, but it's just a piece of paper. Really nothing more than a social convention. This led people to seek new ways to conduct their financial affairs, free from the regulation of banks and governments. Enter crypto. Cryptography is the science of secret writing. It can mean hiding messages in invisible ink or turning text into gibberish with a computer algorithm. But in the 1980s, it was used for something revolutionary, breaking the Enigma code. Alan Turing devised the first computers that could crack the encrypted messages of Nazi Germany's Enigma machine. This gave the Allies an advantage that helped win the war. But once the war was over, the computers needed a purpose. Enter the idea of public and private keys. A public key is like your name and address. It's public, anyone can see it and use it. A private key is like your house keys. You don't show these to anyone. Imagine you've sent some money to someone else. With normal money, the transaction is complete once it leaves your hand. With cryptography, your bank holds onto the key to open the next part of the transaction. The money is only released once the bank opens the envelope. So if you send money to a shop, the bank gives the money to the shop but keeps the key. When the seller sends you something, the bank opens the key and releases your item. It's essentially a third party that makes sure both sides hold up their end of the bargain. This is the same principle that underpins modern encryption and cryptocurrency. Public and private keys are strings of letters and numbers that can be used to send and receive payments. But where does the currency come from? One of the earliest examples of cryptocurrency is Bitcoin, invented in 2008 by the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto. It's a digital currency produced through a process called mining. Computers work in a race against each other to guess the answer to a very complex mathematical equation. The winner of this race gets to add a new transaction to the blockchain and receives a reward in Bitcoin. Each block is linked to the last, hence the name blockchain, and contains information on multiple transactions, which is why it's called a distributed ledger. The great thing about it is that it's decentralized. There is no central authority controlling it, no bank or government. Transactions can be verified by anyone and everyone, making counterfeiting virtually impossible. But if no one is in control, how do you stop people cheating the system? Well, there are a few checks and balances built in. The first is consensus. For the system to work, most people need to agree on what's going on. If not, then confusion will reign. The second is the reward system. Miners get rewarded for verifying transactions, but they're also penalized if they try to cheat. If someone spends the same Bitcoin twice, the entire blockchain is invalidated, meaning miners lose the reward and all the work they did becomes pointless. But why would you want to use such a volatile currency that fluctuates wildly in value? While Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency, it won't be the last. There are now thousands of altcoins, alternative coins. Some are simply copies of Bitcoin with different branding, while others try to improve on its design. Ethereum is one such currency. It was designed to be more versatile. While Bitcoin can only record monetary transactions, Ethereum allows users to build decentralized applications on top of the blockchain. It's almost like building apps for the blockchain. This might sound complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. Most altcoins follow a similar model. Dogecoin, for example, is faster and cheaper to use than Bitcoin, but not taken seriously by investors. Cardano is attempting to overtake Ethereum by being faster, cheaper, and more secure. As technology advances, the variety of cryptocurrencies will only increase. Whether any of them will replace the US dollar or euro remains to be seen. But regardless of what happens, it's important to understand the incentives driving people to experiment with new forms of currency. It all comes down to trust. People tried to replace cowrie shells because they could be cheated. They developed paper money because it was easier to transport than metal. And they're now experimenting with cryptocurrencies because they want to cut out the middleman. However, we pay for things in the future, whether it's with physical or digital cash. The key to the entire system is trust. Trust in the value of the currency itself and trust in the institution that issued it. As long as people can be trusted not to cheat the system, then the system itself should work. If you'd like to learn more about the science behind the modern world, you can take our free brilliant course, The Math and Science of Everyday Things. You'll learn about the physics of cooking, how forensic teams solve crimes, and the math behind the games you play. All without needing any specialist knowledge or qualifications. Just use the link below. Thanks for watching.